The smell of grease and onions still clung to Ray's uniform as he walked down the empty street. His feet ached from another 12-hour shift at Tony's diner, and all he wanted was to get home to his small apartment where his 6-year-old son was already asleep with the babysitter. The October wind cut through his thin jacket as he took his usual shortcut through the alley behind the old shopping center. Most people avoided this area after dark, but Ray had been taking this route for 3 years. It saved him 15 minutes of walking, and every minute mattered when you were a single dad trying to balance work and family. That's when he heard it. A soft whimpering sound, almost like a kitten crying. Ray stopped and listened. The sound came again, definitely not an animal. His heart started beating faster as he realized what he was hearing. That was a child crying. He followed the sound to the back of the alley near the big green dumpster behind the closed clothing store. And there, huddled between some cardboard boxes, was a little girl. She looked to be about 18 months old, maybe 2 years old. Her dark hair was matted and dirty, her face streaked with tears. She wore what had once been an expensive-looking pink dress, but it was now torn and stained. No shoes on her tiny feet despite the cold October night. "Hey there, sweetie," Ray said softly, crouching down a few feet away. He didn't want to scare her more than she already was. The little girl looked up at him with huge brown eyes filled with fear and confusion. She had stopped crying for a moment, but her little body was shivering. Ray's mind raced. Where were her parents? How long had she been out here? He looked around the alley, hoping to see someone frantically searching for a lost child, but the area was completely empty. "It's okay, baby girl," he whispered, moving a little closer. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child didn't run away, which broke Ray's heart even more. She was too young to be afraid of strangers, too innocent to understand the danger of being alone in a dark alley. Ray had been a father for 6 years, and his protective instincts kicked in immediately. This little girl was somebody's daughter, somebody's whole world. She was cold, scared, and probably hungry. He slowly extended his hand toward her. "Come here, sweetness. Let's get you somewhere warm." To his surprise, the little girl reached out and grabbed his finger with her tiny hand. Her grip was weak, and Ray could feel how cold her skin was. "That's it," he said gently, carefully picking her up. She was lighter than his own son had been at that age. Too light. When was the last time she had eaten? The little girl didn't protest as Ray lifted her. Instead, she laid her head against his shoulder, and he could feel her exhaustion. She smelled like she needed a bath, but underneath that, he caught a hint of expensive baby lotion. Someone had been taking good care of her recently. Ray looked around the alley one more time, hoping against hope that her parents would appear. But no one came. He couldn't just leave her here. The temperature was dropping and she was already too cold. "Okay, little one," he said, wrapping his jacket around her small body. "We're going to figure this out." The walk home took 20 minutes, and during that time the little girl fell asleep in his arms. Ray found himself talking to her softly, telling her she was safe now, that everything would be okay. He wasn't sure if he believed his own words, but something about her peaceful face made him determined to keep his promise. Ray lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. It wasn't much, but it was clean and warm. His babysitter, Mrs. Chen from next door, was watching television when he walked in. "Ray, you're early," she started to say, then stopped when she saw the child in his arms. "Oh my goodness, whose baby is that?" "I found her in the alley behind the shopping center," Ray explained quietly. "She was all alone. I couldn't just leave her there." Mrs. Chen, who had raised 5 children of her own, immediately understood. "The poor little thing. Have you called the police?" "I will, but not tonight. Look at her, she's exhausted and scared. Let me get her cleaned up and fed first. I'll call social services in the morning." Mrs. Chen nodded. She had known Ray since he moved into the building, had watched him struggle as a single father after his ex-wife left. She knew he had a good heart. "Do you need help?" she asked. "I think I've got it, but thank you. How was Tommy tonight?" "Perfect as always. He did his homework and went to bed an hour ago." After Mrs. Chen left, Ray sat in his small living room holding the sleeping child. She was so tiny, so vulnerable. He thought about his own son, Tommy, safe and warm in his bed down the hall. What if something happened to Tommy? What if he got lost or taken? Ray would move heaven and earth to find him. This little girl's parents were probably going through that nightmare right now. The child stirred in his arms and opened her eyes. She looked around the unfamiliar room, then up at Ray. For a moment he thought she might cry again, but instead she just watched him with those big brown eyes. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Ray asked softly. As if she understood, the little girl nodded slightly. Ray carried her to his small kitchen. He didn't have much food that would work for such a young child, but he found some crackers and made her a cup of warm milk. She ate eagerly, and Ray realized she had probably been hungry for hours, maybe longer. Next came bath time. Ray ran a warm bath in his small bathroom, using Tommy's gentle soap and shampoo. The little girl didn't cry during the bath, but she held onto Ray's hand the entire time. When he washed her hair, he was amazed at how soft and shiny it became once the dirt was gone. This child had been well cared for before she ended up in that alley. Ray found one of Tommy's old shirts to use as pajamas. It was too big for her, but it was clean and warm. As he tucked her into his bed, he would sleep on the couch tonight. She looked up at him and said her first word since he found her. "Papa?" Ray's heart nearly broke. "No, sweetie. I'm not your papa. But I'm going to take care of you tonight, okay?" She seemed to understand, or maybe she was just too tired to stay awake any longer. Within minutes, she was fast asleep, her tiny hand still gripping the edge of Ray's shirt. Ray sat on the edge of his bed, watching her sleep. Tomorrow, he would have to call social services. Tomorrow, he would have to start the process of finding her real family. But tonight, this little girl was safe. Tonight, she was warm and fed and protected. He thought about his own son sleeping peacefully in the next room. Tommy had never known what it was like to be abandoned or afraid. Ray had made sure of that, even when times were tough, even when he worked 2 jobs just to pay rent. Looking at this sleeping child, Ray made a silent promise. Until he could reunite her with her family, he would protect her the same way he protected his own son. She might be a stranger, but tonight, she was his responsibility, and Ray had never walked away from his responsibilities in his life. Ray woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of soft crying. For a moment he forgot where he was, then remembered he had slept on his old couch. His back ached from the uncomfortable position, but he quickly got up and went to check on the little girl. She was sitting up in his bed, looking around the unfamiliar room with confusion. When she saw Ray, she stopped crying and reached her little arms toward him. "Good morning, sweetheart," Ray said softly, picking her up. She felt warmer than she had the night before, which was a relief. "Let's get you something to eat." While Ray was heating up some oatmeal he had found in his kitchen cabinet, his son Tommy appeared in the doorway. The 6-year-old rubbed his eyes and stared at the little girl Ray was holding. "Dad, who is that?" Tommy asked, his voice still sleepy but curious. Ray had been dreading this moment. How do you explain to a child that you found another child abandoned in an alley? "This is..." "Well, I found her last night. She was lost and scared, so I brought her home to keep her safe." Tommy walked closer, studying the little girl with the serious expression he got when he was trying to understand something complicated. "Where's her mommy and daddy?" "I don't know, buddy, but I'm going to help find them today." The little girl was watching Tommy with equal curiosity. She had finished most of her oatmeal and seemed much more alert than she had been the night before. "What's her name?" Tommy asked. Ray realized he hadn't even thought about what to call her. He couldn't keep referring to her as the little girl or sweetheart forever. "I don't know her real name yet." "What do you think we should call her for now?" Tommy considered this very seriously. "She looks like a lily, like the flowers Mom used to grow." Ray's chest tightened at the mention of Tommy's mother, but he smiled. "Lily is a beautiful name. What do you think, little one? Are you okay with being Lily for now?" The child didn't respond with words, but she smiled for the first time since Ray had found her. It was a small smile, but it lit up her whole face. After breakfast, Ray called the Department of Social Services. He spent 20 minutes on hold before finally reaching someone who could help. "I found an abandoned child last night," Ray explained to the caseworker. "She appears to be about 18 months old, and she was left in an alley behind the shopping center on Pine Street." The woman on the phone, who introduced herself as Ms. Rodriguez, sounded tired and overwhelmed. "Can you bring her in this morning?" "Of course, but I have to work. I'm a single father and I can't afford to miss my shift." There was a pause. I'm sorry, what was your name again?" "Ray Johnson." "Mr. Johnson, I appreciate what you've done, but we're extremely short-staffed right now. We have 3 caseworkers out sick, and we're dealing with an emergency situation involving multiple children. The earliest I can arrange for someone to take her is Friday." Ray looked at the calendar on his kitchen wall. It was Tuesday morning. That's 3 days from now. I'm sorry. I know it's not ideal, but you seem to be taking good care of her. Is there any way you could continue to watch her until Friday? Ray looked at Lily, who was sitting on his living room floor playing with one of Tommy's old toy cars. She seemed content for the first time since he'd found her. I guess I don't have much choice, Ray said. But what if her parents are looking for her? Shouldn't there be some kind of alert or something? We'll file a report and check with the police to see if anyone has reported a missing child matching her description. In the meantime, if you're willing to continue caring for her, we can make this arrangement temporary legal guardianship until Friday. After Ray finished the call, he realized he had a big problem. He couldn't afford to miss 3 days of work, but he also couldn't leave Lily alone. Tommy was in school all day, and Mrs. Chen had her own grandchildren to watch during the day. Ray made a decision that he hoped wouldn't get him fired. He would have to bring Lily to work with him. Tony's Diner wasn't exactly a place for children. It was a small, busy restaurant where Ray worked as the main cook during the morning and lunch shifts. But his boss, Mr. Petrov, was a decent man who had been understanding when Ray needed time off for Tommy's school events. Ray dressed Lily in the cleanest clothes he could find, another one of Tommy's old shirts, and a pair of sweatpants that were too big but would have to work. He packed a small bag with crackers, a bottle, and some toys Tommy had insisted on sharing. "Dad, can I come to work with you too?" Tommy asked as Ray got ready to leave. "You have school, buddy, but maybe this weekend you can come visit the diner and see Lily again." Tommy seemed satisfied with this answer. He gave Lily a gentle hug goodbye, which surprised Ray. His son had always been protective of his toys and his space, but something about this little girl brought out his caring side. The walk to Tony's Diner took 15 minutes. Lily rode in Tommy's old stroller, looking around at everything with wide eyes. She seemed fascinated by the cars and the people walking by. When Ray arrived at the diner, Mr. Petrov was already there, prepping for the morning rush. "Ray, you're early today," Mr. Petrov said, then noticed the stroller. "Who do we have here?" Ray explained the situation as quickly as he could. Mr. Petrov, who was originally from Eastern Europe and had his own stories about helping strangers in need, listened without interrupting. "So you need somewhere for her to stay while you work? Just for 3 days until social services can take her. I know it's not ideal, but I didn't know what else to do." Mr. Petrov looked at Lily, who was chewing on a toy car and babbling quietly to herself. "The break room has a door that closes. You can set up a safe area for her there. But Ray, if the health inspector shows up, I understand. If there are any problems, I'll figure something else out." For the next hour, Ray worked on setting up a makeshift play area in the small break room behind the kitchen. He moved all the cleaning supplies to high shelves and created a soft area on the floor with dish towels and his jacket. Lily seemed content to play with Tommy's toys while Ray worked. Every few minutes, he would check on her through the small window in the door. Sometimes she would wave at him, and Ray found himself smiling despite the stress of the situation. Around 10 in the morning, the diner's usual morning crowd started arriving. Ray was flipping pancakes and scrambling eggs when he heard Lily start to cry. It wasn't the scared crying from the night before, but the frustrated cry of a tired child. Ray quickly plated an order and rushed to the break room. Lily was sitting in the middle of the floor, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Ray asked, picking her up. She pointed toward the front of the diner where the sounds of conversation and clinking dishes were getting louder. Ray realized she probably wanted to be where she could see people. The small break room, while safe, was isolating for a social little girl. He made another decision that might get him in trouble. He brought Lily out to the kitchen with him, setting up a small area behind the grill where she could see him work, but was out of the way of the dangerous equipment. The regular customers noticed immediately. Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday for coffee and toast, was the first to ask questions. "Ray, honey, whose baby is that?" Ray gave her the simple version of the story. Within an hour, half the diner knew about Lily, and Ray was surprised by the response. Instead of complaints, the customers were bringing small gifts. Someone brought a coloring book and crayons. Another person offered to buy formula and diapers. Mrs. Patterson even offered to babysit if Ray needed help. By lunchtime, Ray realized something amazing was happening. This little girl, who had been abandoned and scared just 24 hours ago, was bringing out the best in everyone around her. She was laughing and clapping when the coffee machine made its loud hissing sound. She waved at customers through the kitchen window. She even took a short nap curled up on Ray's jacket in her safe corner. When Ray's shift ended at 3 o'clock, he had made enough in tips to buy Lily proper clothes and food for the rest of the week. More importantly, he had discovered that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easiest thing to do. But it's always worth it. As Ray pushed the stroller home, with Lily babbling happily and playing with a small teddy bear one of the customers had given her, he wondered what her real parents were going through. Somewhere out there, someone was probably desperate to find this sweet little girl. But until Friday, Ray would make sure she felt loved and safe. It was the least he could do. 3 days earlier, Claire Ashford had been living in a completely different world. Her penthouse apartment overlooking the city was filled with the latest technology, expensive furniture, and everything money could buy. But none of that mattered now. She sat in her home office, surrounded by laptops, phones, and printed photos of her missing daughter. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of 3 sleepless nights. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore the same clothes she had put on the morning Grace disappeared. Grace, her beautiful 18-month-old daughter with the big brown eyes and infectious giggle. The little girl who called her mama and loved to clap her hands whenever music played. Claire's assistant knocked on the door. "The private investigator is here for the update meeting." "Send him in," Claire said, not looking up from the stack of missing person flyers she was reviewing. Detective Miller had been working missing person cases for 20 years, but he had never seen a parent as determined as Claire. She had hired his entire team, offered rewards that made news headlines, and personally visited every homeless shelter, hospital, and police station in the city. "Any news?" Claire asked before he even sat down. Miller shook his head. "We've expanded the search to include the surrounding counties. We've interviewed everyone at the park where she was last seen, checked every security camera in a 5-mile radius, and followed up on dozens of tips." "But Claire, most of these tips are dead ends." "I know." Claire rubbed her temples. The headache that had started 3 days ago never seemed to go away. 3 days ago, Grace had been in the custody of her court-appointed supervisor, Janet, during one of Claire's ex-husband's supervised visits. Claire's divorce had been ugly, filled with accusations and legal battles. David had become increasingly unstable, angry about the money he wasn't getting. Furious that Claire had primary custody, the custody arrangement required that David's visits with Grace be supervised by a neutral third party. Janet had been doing this job for 5 years and had an excellent reputation. But something had gone wrong that Tuesday afternoon. According to Janet's statement to the police, she had taken Grace to the park as planned. David was supposed to meet them there at 2 o'clock for his 2-hour visit. But when Janet went to buy ice cream from the vendor, she turned around to find both David and Grace gone. Janet had immediately called the police and then Claire. By the time Claire arrived at the park, there were already police cars and officers searching the area. But David and Grace had vanished. The police found David 6 hours later, drunk and alone in a bar across town. He claimed he didn't know where Grace was. He said Janet had given Grace to someone else and he had left. His story made no sense and he was too intoxicated to give clear answers. Janet was found the next morning in her apartment, packing frantically. When the police questioned her, she broke down and admitted the truth. She had been secretly taking money from David for months, giving him information about Claire's schedule and Grace's routine. The plan had been for Janet to accidentally let David leave with Grace during the park visit. David was supposed to take Grace to his mother's house in another state, where he would file for emergency custody and claim Claire was an unfit mother. But something had gone wrong. David had gotten cold feet, realizing that kidnapping his own daughter could land him in prison. In a panic, Janet had taken Grace and driven around the city for hours, not knowing what to do. Finally, terrified of going to prison, Janet had made a decision that still made Claire sick to think about. She had left Grace in what she thought was a safe place behind a shopping center, then called in an anonymous tip to police about seeing a suspicious man with a child in a different part of town. By the time the police realized Janet's tip was false and got the real story from her, Grace had been missing for almost 24 hours. The shopping center area had been searched, but there was no sign of her. Claire stared at the map on her wall, covered with red pins marking every place they had searched. The shopping center was right in the middle of the map, but they had found no trace of Grace there. "We need to search that area again," Claire told Detective Miller. "Maybe we missed something." "Claire, we've been through that area 3 times. We've talked to every business owner, every resident in the surrounding blocks. We've checked dumpsters, abandoned buildings, everything. Then we do it again. She's out there somewhere." Miller looked at the young woman who had built a tech empire before her 30th birthday. Claire was brilliant, driven, and used to solving problems with money and determination. But this wasn't a business problem. This was every parent's worst nightmare. "The FBI is officially involved now," Miller said gently. "They have resources we don't have, and the media coverage has been extensive. Everyone in the city knows to look for Grace." Claire nodded, but she wasn't really listening. She was thinking about the last normal morning she had spent with Grace. It had been rushed, like most of their mornings. Claire had been on a conference call while Grace ate breakfast, handled emails while she gave Grace a bath, and was reviewing contracts while Grace played in her room. Claire's business had made her wealthy beyond her wildest dreams. She employed over 200 people, had been featured on magazine covers, and was regularly invited to speak at conferences around the world. But sitting in her empty penthouse, surrounded by all the symbols of her success, Claire realized none of it mattered without Grace. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Another tip, another possible sighting, another hope that might lead nowhere. "This is Claire. Ms. Ashford? This is Officer Martinez with the city police. We got a call about a possible sighting of Grace at a diner on the east side of town." Claire's heart started racing. She had received dozens of these calls, and they had all been false alarms. Children who looked similar to Grace, well-meaning people who thought they had seen her, confused witnesses who mixed up details. What kind of sighting? "A man has been caring for a young girl who matches Grace's description. The caller said he found her 3 days ago, which matches our timeline." 3 days ago. That was exactly when Grace had disappeared. "I'm on my way," Claire said, already reaching for her car keys. "Ms. Ashford, please wait for us to verify before you come down here. We don't want to get your hopes up if—" But Claire had already hung up. She couldn't wait. If there was even a chance that someone had found Grace, she had to go immediately. The drive across town took 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. Claire's hands were shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. She had been disappointed so many times over the past 3 days. Each false lead had felt like losing Grace all over again. But something about this call felt different. The timing was right. The location was close to where Janet had admitted leaving Grace, and the detail about a man caring for the child, rather than just seeing her, gave Claire a strange sense of hope. As she drove through the less affluent part of the city, Claire realized she had never been in this neighborhood before. The buildings were older, the streets were narrower, and there were no fancy restaurants or boutique shops like in her part of town. She thought about Grace being somewhere in this area for 3 days. Had she been scared? Cold, hungry? The thought made Claire's chest tight with guilt and fear. What kind of person finds an abandoned child and takes care of her for 3 days? Claire's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a kind family who had been trying to find Grace's parents. Maybe it was someone who recognized her from the news coverage. Or maybe it was someone with bad intentions who had been waiting for the right moment to ask for ransom money. Claire pushed that thought away. She couldn't think about the worst-case scenarios anymore. For 3 days, she had imagined every terrible thing that could happen to a lost child. But right now, she had to focus on hope. She pulled into the parking lot of Tony's diner and saw the police cars already there. Through the window, she could see officers talking to an older man who must be the owner. Claire took a deep breath and walked toward the diner, her legs feeling weak with nervous energy. In a few minutes, she would know if this was another false lead, or if she was about to be reunited with her daughter. Either way, her life was about to change again. Claire's hands were trembling as she pushed open the door to Tony's diner. The small bell above the entrance chimed, and several people looked up from their meals. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Officer Martinez met her at the entrance. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who had been working on Grace's case since the beginning. "Ms. Ashford, please try to stay calm. We're still verifying the details, but the description matches and the timing is right." Claire nodded, but she wasn't really listening. Her eyes were scanning the diner, looking for any sign of Grace. The place was smaller than she had expected, with worn red booths and a long counter where a few customers sat drinking coffee. "Where is she?" Claire whispered. The man who found her is in the kitchen. He's been taking care of her for 3 days, just like we thought. He called social services, but they couldn't take her until Friday, so he's been... Claire heard a sound that made her freeze. A child's laughter coming from somewhere behind the counter. That laugh, she would know it anywhere. It was Grace. Without waiting for permission, Claire walked quickly toward the sound. Officer Martinez followed her, along with Detective Miller, who had arrived just minutes after Claire. The older man behind the counter, who must be the owner, tried to stop her. "Ma'am, you can't go back there." "That's my daughter," Claire said, her voice breaking. "That's my little girl." The man's expression changed immediately. Oh my goodness, Ray! Ray, come out here!" Claire heard footsteps, and then a man appeared from the kitchen. He was probably in his 30s, wearing a stained apron and a tired expression. His dark hair was messy, and he looked like he had been working hard. But Claire barely noticed him because in his arms was Grace. Her daughter looked completely different than Claire had expected. Grace's hair was clean and brushed, tied back with what looked like a piece of ribbon. She wore clothes that were too big for her, but they were clean and warm. Most shocking of all, Grace was smiling and babbling happily, playing with a small wooden spoon like it was the most fascinating toy in the world. "Grace," Claire whispered. The little girl looked up at the sound of her name. When she saw Claire, her expression became confused. She looked back at Ray, then at Claire again, as if trying to remember where she had seen this woman before. "Grace, it's Mama," Claire said, stepping closer. "It's Mama, baby." But instead of reaching for Claire, Grace buried her face in Ray's shoulder. She wasn't crying, but she was clearly more comfortable with him than with this stranger who claimed to be her mother. Claire felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. Her own daughter didn't recognize her. Or worse, she did recognize her, but preferred this stranger who had cared for her for 3 days. Ray looked uncomfortable with the situation. He was staring at Claire with a mixture of surprise and concern. "You're her mother?" he asked quietly. Claire nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. "I've been taking care of her since Tuesday night. I found her behind the shopping center on Pine Street. She was all alone and scared, so I brought her home." Detective Miller stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Detective Miller. We've been investigating this child's disappearance for 3 days. Can you tell us exactly what happened?" But Claire wasn't listening to the official questions and answers. She was watching Grace, who was peeking at her over Ray's shoulder with curious eyes. Her daughter looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked like she had been genuinely cared for. "What have you been calling her?" Claire asked Ray. Ray looked embarrassed. "We didn't know her real name, so my son suggested Lily. I hope that's okay." "Your son?" "He's 6. He's in school right now. But he's been really good with her. They've become friends." Claire felt tears starting to form in her eyes. This man had not only taken care of Grace, but he had brought her into his family. His own son had accepted her and given her a name when Claire wasn't there to do it herself. "She looks good," Claire said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I tried to take good care of her," Ray said. "I have a son, so I know what kids need. She was hungry when I found her and really scared, but she's been doing better each day." Claire watched as Grace reached for the wooden spoon Ray had given her. She was making happy babbling sounds and seemed completely content. "Has she been eating okay?" Claire asked. "Yeah, she loves oatmeal and crackers. Yesterday I made her some scrambled eggs and she ate the whole plate. Oh, and she really likes music. Whenever the radio plays in the kitchen, she claps her hands." Claire's heart ached. She knew Grace loved music. It was one of the few things Claire always made time for. They would dance together in the living room of the penthouse, Grace giggling as Claire spun her around. But here was this stranger, this cook in a small diner, who had noticed the same thing about her daughter in just 3 days. "Where has she been sleeping?" Detective Miller asked. "In my bed. I slept on the couch. I wanted to make sure she felt safe." Claire stared at Ray. He had given up his own bed for her daughter. He had spent his own money to buy her food and clothes. He had taken her to work with him because he couldn't afford childcare but refused to leave her alone. This man who had never met Grace before Tuesday night had done more for her in 3 days than some people would do for their own family. "I need to ask," Detective Miller continued. "Why didn't you call the police immediately?" Ray shifted Grace to his other arm before answering. "I was going to, but it was late at night and she was so scared. I thought it would be better to wait until morning. When I called social services, They said they couldn't take her until Friday because they were short-staffed. I couldn't just abandon her. Claire found her voice again. You've been taking care of her this whole time, even though you didn't have to? Ray looked directly at her for the first time. She's just a baby. Someone's little girl. I couldn't leave her alone and scared. What kind of person would that make me? The simple honesty in his voice made Claire's tears finally start falling. This man, who clearly didn't have much money, who worked in a diner and lived in what was probably a small apartment, had opened his home and his heart to a stranger's child without expecting anything in return. I don't know how to thank you, Claire said. You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad she's back with her family. Grace had been watching this conversation with wide eyes. Slowly, she reached one small hand toward Claire. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she moved closer. Hi, baby, Claire whispered. Mama missed you so much. Grace touched Claire's face gently as if trying to remember her. Then she smiled, that beautiful smile that had been missing from Claire's life for 3 terrible days. Mama, Grace said clearly. And Claire started crying harder. But when Claire reached to take Grace from Ray's arms, the little girl held onto Ray's shirt and made a sound of protest. It's okay, Ray said gently to Grace. This is your mama. She's been looking for you. Grace looked between Ray and Claire, clearly confused about why she had to choose. Claire realized something that broke her heart and filled it with gratitude at the same time. Her daughter had bonded with this man who had saved her. Ray wasn't just someone who had found Grace and called the authorities. He had become important to her, and Claire could see in his eyes that Grace had become important to him too. Would you? Claire started to say, then stopped. She wasn't sure how to ask what she wanted to ask. Would I what? Ray asked. Would you mind if we sat down somewhere? I think Grace might feel more comfortable if you stayed with us for a few minutes while she gets used to me again. Ray looked surprised, but he nodded. Of course. Whatever she needs. As they sat in a booth in the corner of the diner, with Grace sitting between them and playing with both the wooden spoon Ray had given her and a toy Claire had brought from home. Claire realized her life was about to change in ways she never could have expected. The past 3 days had been the worst of her life, but they had also led her to this moment, and to this man who had shown her what it really meant to put a child's needs first. Claire wasn't sure what happened next, but she knew one thing for certain. Ray had saved more than just Grace's life. He had shown Claire what kind of mother she wanted to be. For the next hour, Claire sat in that small diner booth watching her daughter play. Grace had finally warmed up to her again, but she kept looking back at Ray every few minutes as if making sure he was still there. The police had finished their questions and paperwork. Detective Miller had explained what would happen next. There would be an investigation into how Grace ended up alone, but Ray wouldn't be in any trouble. In fact, they told him he would probably receive some kind of community recognition for what he had done. But Ray didn't seem interested in recognition. He was focused on Grace, making sure she had enough to drink, wiping her face when she spilled juice on herself, and quietly singing a little song that made her giggle. Claire watched all of this with a growing feeling in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude, though she felt plenty of that. It was something bigger and more complicated. Ray, she said quietly, can I ask you something? He looked up from the coloring book he had been sharing with Grace. Sure. How did you afford to take care of her for 3 days?
I mean, you had to buy clothes, food, diaper. Ray looked uncomfortable with the question.
It wasn't that much money. But you're a cook at a diner. You have your own son to take care of. It must have been. It was what needed to be done, Ray interrupted gently. Sometimes you don't think about the cost. Claire felt her throat tighten. She spent more money on coffee in a week than Ray probably made in a day. But he had opened his wallet without hesitation for a child who wasn't even his. What about work? You must have missed shifts, or... I brought her with me. Mr. Petrov let me set up a safe area for her in the back room. The customers actually loved having her here. Claire looked around the small diner with new eyes. She had been so focused on Grace that she hadn't really noticed the other people in the restaurant. But now she saw them watching Grace with gentle smiles, heard them speaking to her in soft voices when she waved at them. She's been happy here, Claire said, and it wasn't a question. Kids are pretty adaptable. As long as they feel safe and loved, they can be happy almost anywhere. The simple truth of that statement hit Claire like a wave. Grace had been happy here, in this small diner with worn booths and old linoleum floors because she felt safe and loved. Meanwhile, Claire's penthouse apartment with its expensive furniture and high-tech gadgets had felt empty and cold without Grace's laughter filling it. "Ray, can I tell you something?" He nodded, though he looked a little nervous about what she might say. Before Grace disappeared, I was working 12-hour days. I had 3 nannies because I fired the first 2 for not following my detailed schedules. I had Grace's days planned down to the minute: educational activities, music lessons, baby yoga classes. Ray listened without judgment, occasionally glancing at Grace, who was now trying to color inside the lines of a picture of a butterfly. I thought I was being a good mother because I was providing the best of everything: the best food, the best toys, the best education, but I was so busy managing her life that I forgot to actually live it with her. Claire's voice started to crack. The morning she disappeared, I was on a conference call during her breakfast. I was answering emails while she played in her room. The last thing I said to her before she left with the supervisor was, "Mommy's working, sweetie. Go play quietly." Ray reached across the table and handed Claire a napkin without saying anything. When I found out she was missing, all I could think about was how I had wasted so much time, how I had been so focused on giving her everything that I forgot to give her the most important thing. "Which is?" Ray asked softly. "Me? My attention? My presence, just being there with her, the way you've been here with her." Claire wiped her eyes and looked at Ray, who was still listening patiently. "I built a company worth millions of dollars, but I couldn't figure out how to make my daughter feel as loved and secure as you made her feel in 3 days." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what Grace did yesterday morning?" Claire shook her head. "She woke up and started looking around my apartment like she was searching for something. I thought maybe she needed to use the bathroom or she was hungry. But then she walked over to my son's bookshelf and picked out a picture book. She brought it to me and climbed up on my lap." Claire listened, imagining Grace doing exactly what Ray described. We sat there for 20 minutes just reading together. She couldn't understand all the words, but she loved looking at the pictures and hearing my voice. She kept turning pages and pointing at things, and I would tell her what they were. A dog, a tree, a house. Claire felt tears starting again. She loves books. I keep meaning to read to her more, but there's always something more urgent. "The thing is," Ray continued, "it wasn't urgent at all. I didn't have anywhere important to be. My son was still asleep, breakfast could wait, and for those 20 minutes nothing in the world mattered except Grace and that picture book." Claire understood what he was trying to tell her, and it hurt because it was true. "After we're done here, I'm going home to my son," Ray said. "We'll have dinner together. Probably nothing fancy, maybe just soup and sandwiches. He'll tell me about his day at school, and I'll help him with his homework. Then we'll watch a cartoon together before bedtime." Claire tried to remember the last time she had done something that simple with Grace. "It's not about the money or the fancy stuff," Ray said gently. "It's about showing up, being present, making them feel like they're the most important thing in your world because they are." Grace looked up from her coloring and smiled at both of them. She had purple crayon on her fingers and a proud expression on her face. "Pretty," she said, holding up her picture. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Claire said, and meant it. "So pretty," Ray agreed. "You're such a good artist." Grace beamed and went back to coloring. Claire made a decision that surprised even her. "Ray, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer." Ray looked concerned. "Okay, I don't want to hire you. I don't want to give you money or try to buy your friendship. But would you maybe be willing to teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to be present with Grace. How to make her feel the way you made her feel these past 3 days. I know it sounds crazy asking a stranger to teach me how to be a mother to my own daughter, but..." Ray shook his head. "It doesn't sound crazy. And you don't need me to teach you anything. You just need to slow down and pay attention to what Grace is telling you she needs." Claire thought about this. What if I made some changes? What if I worked less, spent more time at home, tried to be more like you were with her? Then Grace would be a very lucky little girl. 6 months later, Claire was sitting on the floor of her living room, which looked very different than it had before. The expensive glass coffee table had been replaced with a soft rug where Grace could play safely. The formal dining room had become a playroom filled with books, art supplies, and toys. Claire had restructured her entire business, delegating more responsibilities to her management team and working from home 3 days a week. She still ran her company, but she did it around Grace's schedule instead of the other way around. Grace was now talking in full sentences, and her favorite phrase was, "Mama, look." Claire had learned to stop whatever she was doing and really look, really listen, really be present for those moments. On this particular Saturday afternoon, they had visitors. Ray and his son Tommy were coming for dinner, something that had become a monthly tradition. Grace ran to the door when she heard the knock, calling Ray, "Tommy," with excitement. When Claire opened the door, Grace hugged both of their guests with the enthusiasm of someone seeing old friends. "How's my favorite artist?" Ray asked Grace, who immediately took his hand to drag him over to see her latest drawings. Tommy, now 7, had become like a big brother to Grace. He taught her new words, helped her with puzzles, and was endlessly patient with her questions. "How are things at the diner?" Claire asked Ray as they sat down for a dinner that Claire had actually cooked herself. "Good. Mr. Petrov says business has been better since Grace used to visit. People still ask about her." Claire smiled. "She asks about everyone there too. Yesterday she wanted to know if Mrs. Patterson still comes in for coffee and toast." After dinner, while Grace and Tommy played in the living room, Ray and Claire cleaned dishes together in the kitchen. "You know," Ray said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "That night I found Grace. I was just trying to get home from work. I was tired, I was worried about paying bills, and I was thinking about all the things I needed to do the next day." Claire nodded, drying a plate. "If I had been in a hurry, if I had been too focused on my own problems, I might have walked right past that alley. I might not have heard her crying, but you did hear her." "Yeah, I did, and it changed everything. Not just for Grace, but for me and Tommy too. It taught us that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just pay attention to what's happening right in front of you." Claire set down the dish towel and looked at Ray. "Thank you, not just for saving Grace, but for saving me too. For showing me what really matters." Ray smiled. Grace saved herself. She just needed people who were willing to stop and listen. From the living room, they heard Grace's giggle and Tommy's patient voice explaining how to build a tower with blocks. Claire looked through the doorway at her daughter, who was completely absorbed in playing, completely happy in the moment. And for the first time since Grace had been born, Claire felt like she truly understood what it meant to be a mother. It wasn't about providing the best of everything. It was about being present for everything. The messy moments, the quiet moments, the ordinary moments that somehow added up to a life filled with love. And that was worth more than all the money in the world.